A college student vanished from her friend's house in the middle of the night while the others were asleep in the next room. No one heard or saw anything unusual, but by morning, she was gone. Police were called in right away, and the case instantly became the most talked about story in the city. Detectives chased down thousands of leads before finally uncovering the unexpected truth that shook the entire country to its core. Brianna Dennison was born on March 29, 1988, in Reno, Nevada. She grew up there with her parents and younger brother, until, when she was 6, her father passed away unexpectedly. The loss hit the family hard, but it brought Brianna even closer to her mom, and she did everything she could to help. Her family also loved to travel. Brianna made it through half of Europe, visited Japan, and even spent a year in Italy on a student exchange program. After graduating high school, she headed to California to attend Santa Barbara City College. She'd always wanted to work with kids, so she set her sights on becoming a child psychologist. In Santa Barbara, she quickly found a circle of friends and started dating a guy. In the winter of 2008, 19-year-old Brianna was on a college break and came back to Reno to spend time with her family and friends. On Friday, January 18th, she headed over to her best friend's house, planning to stay there for the weekend. Along with another friend, they had their days all planned out, skiing during the day, then attending concerts and nightclubs in the evenings. On Saturday, January 19th, Brianna was supposed to go to a concert by one of her favorite bands, but she came down with a cold. Still, her mom encouraged her to go anyway, so Brianna decided she didn't want to miss it. A few hours later, she left the concert a bit early to head back to her friend's house, hoping to keep her cold from getting worse. The house wasn't far, but it was freezing outside, and she didn't want to walk. She spotted a car pulling out of the parking lot and asked the driver for a ride. He agreed, and she made it home, where she started waiting for her friends to get back from the concert. They showed up around 3:30 in the morning. The girls chatted for a bit before heading to bed. Around 4:30, Brianna sent a text to her boyfriend, and then fell asleep. Her friends were sleeping in the next room while Brianna had crashed on the couch in the kitchen. But around 9 a.m., when they got up and started making breakfast, Brianna was gone. At first, they didn't think much of it, figuring she just moved into the bedroom, which had the door shut. About 40 minutes later, one of them knocked on that bedroom door to wake her up for breakfast, but there was no answer. She knocked again, still nothing. Finally, she opened the door and found out that the room was empty. The friends searched the entire house and quickly realized Brianna wasn't anywhere. But all of her things, her phone, purse, clothes, even her shoes, were still there. The whole thing felt wrong. It was below freezing outside, and they couldn't imagine any reason she would walk out in just a t-shirt. They called her mom, but she had no idea where her daughter could be. She rushed over right away. And in the meantime, the friends spotted something deeply unsettling. On the pillow where Brianna had been sleeping, there were a few small reddish stains, looking an awful lot like blood. Panicked, her friends called the police, and officers were on the scene almost immediately. They didn't find any signs of a struggle inside the house, but a few things stood out right away. The blanket Brianna had been sleeping under was lying several feet away from the couch, and the stuffed teddy bear she'd been using as an extra pillow was missing. There were no signs of forced entry either, but the friends told police they never locked the front door, which just so happened to be right in front of where Brianna had been sleeping. From the very first hours, detectives started leaning towards the theory that she'd been abducted. It seemed unlikely she would have walked out into the freezing cold in just a t-shirt, but they still couldn't figure out how someone could have taken her without waking the two other girls sleeping in the next room. Forensic experts soon came up with the most plausible explanation, based on the pillow Brianna had been using. First, they confirmed the blood on it was hers. Then they determined that the killer had likely pressed her face into the pillow with enough force to keep her from making a sound. The crime lab also swabbed the front door handle and found DNA belonging to an unknown man, someone who wasn't in the system. With no other useful clues inside the house, police launched a massive search across the city. They also began going door to door in the neighborhood, asking men to voluntarily provide DNA samples. Meanwhile, detectives dug into Brianna's phone and found a string of messages from her boyfriend. On the night she vanished, he had sent her multiple insults, and her friends said the two were on the verge of breaking up. Investigators briefly considered him a suspect until they confirmed he was in another state at the time and couldn't have been involved in the abduction. From the very first days, Brianna's disappearance became the biggest news story in the city, and soon it spread across the entire country. Her photo was plastered on billboards, and local media ran constant updates on the case. In total, police collected around 3,000 DNA samples from local residents, but the city's crime lab simply couldn't handle that kind of workload. Authorities turned to the public for help, quickly raising $150,000 to cover additional testing. Eventually, experts managed to process every single sample, but not one of them matched the DNA of the suspected abductor. Soon, the FBI joined the investigation, focusing their efforts on finding the suspect. Detectives first looked into the man who had given Brianna a ride home that night, suspecting he might have returned later to abduct her. After the media reported that police wanted to speak with him, the man came forward, provided a DNA sample, and presented a solid alibi, clearing him from their list of suspects. Another lead came from a man who lived directly across the street from Brianna's friend's house. He told police that he hadn't been sleeping that night and was sitting in his living room. Around 5 a.m., he noticed a shadow pass in front of his window, followed by the sound of someone trying to open his front door. After several failed attempts, the noise stopped. At first, he didn't think much of it, assuming it was just someone drunk who had mistaken his house for their own. With each passing day, the search efforts grew. Volunteers joined the police, helicopters scanned the area from above, and officers with search dogs combed through hard-to-reach places like forests, fields, and drainage ditches. But none of it led anywhere. Based on the evidence they had, detectives doubted this was the suspect's first crime. They began digging into the unsolved cases in Reno, and soon found two incidents that caught their attention. In November 2007, just a few months before Brianna vanished, an unknown man attacked a 21-year-old college student. She was in a parking lot when he ran up, knocked her to the ground, pulled a gun, and assaulted her. He told her to keep quiet, but instead, she screamed at the top of her lungs. That seemed to scare him off, and he took off running, dropping a pack of condoms in the process. A month later, another attack happened. This time, the victim was a 22-year-old student standing outside her home when a man ran up from behind and covered her mouth and nose, causing her to lose consciousness. She woke up in the cab of a pickup truck. A few minutes later, the driver pulled over and sexually assaulted her, ordering her not to look at him the entire time. When he was done, he drove her back to her house and told her not to turn around as she walked to the door. She went straight to the police and gave a partial description. It was a white male, heavy-set, with tanned arms. She also described his pickup truck, adding one chilling detail. Inside, there was a child's shoe. There was another disturbing link between the two attacks. In both cases, the attacker took the victim's underwear with him. Investigators collected DNA from both women, and the samples matched each other. Now, detectives working Brianna's case requested a comparison with the sample from the door handle, and it came back as a match. This confirmed their worst fear. They were dealing with a serial predator who targeted women for sexual assault. Once this information hit the news, another student came forward. She told police that one night someone had tried to break into her home, yanking on the front door handle so hard it actually bent. But whoever it was didn't manage to get inside. Using the description from the other two victims, police put together a composite sketch and a profile of the suspect, a man of average height, between 28 and 40 years old, with a solid, muscular build. His portrait was sent out to local newspapers and TV stations, along with a public plea for help identifying him. Panic began to spread through Reno. People realized there was a serial predator operating right under their noses, and feared it was only a matter of time before he struck again. Gun and pepper spray sales skyrocketed, and women were terrified to stay home alone. But even with the public's intense pressure, investigators still weren't any closer to making an arrest or finding Brianna. With each passing day, hope that she might be alive grew dimmer. Divers were sent to search the local river for her body, joined by hundreds of volunteers braving the freezing cold. Police also received over 5,000 tips, but not a single one brought them any closer to finding Brianna. This went on for almost a month, until police finally got a call. On February 15th, a worker was heading out for his lunch break. To save some time, he decided to cut through an abandoned lot on his way to a cafe. As he walked, he spotted a discarded Christmas tree lying in a ditch and noticed a pair of socks sticking out from behind it. When he got closer, he saw what looked like a human figure. At first, he thought someone had dumped a mannequin, but it didn't take long for him to realize it was a body, and he immediately called police. Detectives sent the remains to the medical examiner to confirm the identity and determine the cause of death. The victim was completely naked except for socks, and lying next to the body were 2 pairs of women's underwear. The examiner confirmed it was Brianna. She had died from strangulation, and based on marks on her neck, the killer had used underwear to do it. According to the pathologist, Brianna was murdered inside the house, and her body was later taken away. This meant she had been dead since the very day she disappeared. As for the underwear, 1 pair belonged to Brianna's friend, who hadn't even realized they were missing, but the second pair wasn't hers. Detectives believe the killer deliberately left them at the scene to taunt police. Brianna had also been sexually assaulted, and male DNA was recovered from her body. As expected, it matched the samples from the 2 earlier assaults and the one found on the doorknob. The news of Brianna's body being found hit the entire city like a punch to the gut. Thousands of people had been following the case, clinging to the hope that she might still be alive. In the weeks that followed, police kept working to identify the killer, but every lead they chased ended in a dead end. A few weeks later, they decided to share more details with the public, revealing that the perpetrator seemed to collect his victims' underwear. Investigators hoped that maybe a relative or acquaintance had noticed something suspicious like that, but no useful tips came in. From that point on, the investigation all but froze, even though dozens of officers were still on the case. Weeks turned into months, and despite all their efforts, it was starting to feel like the killer had managed to get away with it. But everything changed on November 1st, almost a year after the murder. Police got a call from someone who wanted to stay anonymous. This person said that a while back, her friend found women's underwear in her boyfriend's pickup truck. When she asked him about it, his excuse sounded beyond suspicious. And there was more. Shortly after Brianna's murder, this man sold his pickup and left town. That man was 27-year-old James Bila, and police quickly turned their attention to him. James was a former Marine with extensive training in martial arts. At the time of Brianna's murder, he was working construction jobs and had spent a lot of time on projects near the university, right in the area where Brianna's friend lived, so he knew the neighborhood well. Digging deeper, detectives learned that James had a violent streak. His ex-girlfriend told them he had hit her multiple times and had once nearly killed someone with a knife. There was also an incident where, without any reason at all, he broke a dog's leg. Even with all that, James had never faced any charges, and police had never collected his DNA. Detectives soon learned he had already moved back to Reno, so they put him under round-the-clock surveillance. They also gave him a call, saying they wanted to talk. James agreed to meet, but didn't even bother asking what it was about. The next day, he sat down with detectives, and they asked where he was on the night Brianna was killed. James claimed he had been at his girlfriend's place, but when they asked for a DNA sample, he flat out refused. Right after that, police went to his ex-girlfriend, and she told them his alibi was a complete lie. He hadn't been with her that night. They also learned that James and this woman had a 4-year-old son together. Investigators asked the mother if they could take a DNA sample from the boy, and she agreed. Lab results showed the killer's DNA was a near-perfect match to the child's, which essentially meant someone in the boy's immediate family was responsible for the crimes. Now that they had all this evidence, detectives went back to James, but this time it was to arrest him. He was hit with a long list of charges connected to all 3 cases where his DNA had turned up. Still, he refused to admit any guilt. James was sent to jail to await trial while investigators kept building their case. When they spoke with his father, they learned James had a long history of drug abuse, one of the main reasons he'd been kicked out of the Marines. Detectives also tracked down his old van, and testing showed that fibers from the seat covers were an exact match to fibers previously found on the clothing of another student who'd been kidnapped and driven home. His former employer had something to add as well. According to him, James quit his job the very same day Brianna's body was found, and then took off to another state. When the trial began, James' attorney tried to argue that the cases weren't connected, that each crime had a different signature. But those claims didn't hold much weight, especially with the prosecution's long list of evidence tying James to every one of them. And it didn't help his case that during the proceedings, James kept smiling and even smirking. In late May 2010, just over 2 years after Brianna's murder, the jury found him guilty on all counts. That left the court to decide his sentence, and the death penalty was on the table. James' lawyer pushed hard to avoid the harshest punishment, telling the judge about his client's troubled childhood, how his alcoholic father would regularly beat him, and pointing out his good behavior in jail. None of that swayed the judge, and James was sentenced to death. Just a few months later, he picked up 4 additional life sentences for other charges, meaning that even if his execution never happens, which is entirely possible, he still has no chance of ever walking free. In the years that followed, James' lawyer tried several times to overturn the sentence, but each time the state Supreme Court upheld the death penalty. As a result, James remains behind bars, with no set date for his execution. After his arrest, Brianna's family pushed for a new law in Nevada requiring police to collect DNA from anyone arrested for a violent crime. They believed that if such a policy had been in place earlier, James would have been caught after his first attack on a student, and Brianna's life might have been spared. Tragically, her death wasn't the last blow to the family. Exactly 10 years after her murder, her 19-year-old cousin went missing and has never been found. She told her parents she was going to another state with a guy she'd recently met, and then stopped answering her phone. Her family fears something terrible happened to her, and they still hold out hope that one day she'll come home. Share your thoughts in the comments section, and don't forget to press the like button if you appreciate my video. Thanks for watching.